evening, everybody, and welcome to the first episode of Late Night in Canada. How's everyone doing tonight? I'm just kidding. It's a year into a global pandemic. We all know how we're doing. I'm your host, Clare Blackwood, and I am so excited to be coming to you all the way from my one-bedroom apartment. I only mention that because if you hear desperate scratching at any point in the show, it's because my cat, Gandalf, is having a party in his litter box exactly 8 feet to my left, and you are not invited. God, I can't believe it only took her 15 seconds to talk about her cat, said exactly no one. I want to talk about what's happening in Canada today. Politics, current events, entertainment, and more. Because it has recently come to my attention that a lot of us know way more about what's going on in America than what's happening here. And that is not cool. I recently asked a friend who Aaron O'Toole was, and he just showed me this picture of a smug polar bear in a tie. Which is ridiculous. I mean, it looks nothing like... Excellent. It's easy to think of Canadian politics as boring when compared to the States because, let's be honest, we do have our differences. For example, if U.S. political diplomacy is Cujo, Canada is this heckin' doggo doing you a big frighten. Canadian election campaigns last a maximum of 50 days and generally feature a small group of reasonably normal candidates, whereas U.S. elections last 2,000 years and feature candidates like Kanye West, the CEO of Starbucks, and this man, whose election promises included teeth brushing, going back in time to kill Hitler, and free ponies. His name was Vermin Love Supreme, because of course it was. The United States has an ageless evil hell turtle fixed in the ruination of democracy, and Canada has this little guy. Okay, I need to tell you that I found this picture online with the terrified caption, "I flipped this turtle on its back! What do I do now?" in all caps, which I just think is great. Look, basically, if American politics can be summed up with this picture from Mad Max Fury Road, then Canada is this picture of a goose attacking a frightened hippie on a bicycle. Depending on who you voted for in the last election, that goose is either Justin Trudeau or Andrew Scheer. However, in Canada, we face so many of the same issues the U.S. does. Racism, bigotry, a horrifying history of Indigenous genocide that we refuse to reckon with, the persistent existence of Justin Bieber. We're just much better at being passive-aggressive about it than they are. Just because an angry mob of white supremacists hasn't stormed Parliament Hill demanding to take selfies in the House of Commons does not mean that we don't have our own shit to talk about. And the reason that so many of us are uninformed is because we have the privilege of being so. And that is not boring. It's important. Also, every time I meet someone who doesn't vote because they don't know anything about Canadian politics, I'm contractually obligated to throw another dart at the Stephen Harper dartboard, and that thing is getting full. Okay, so I'm also the head of the graphics department on this show, and I'm really proud of this one. So let's talk, Canada. We're going to cover the main stuff that happened this week, talk about a larger issue, and chat with some really amazing Canadians. This week, I was lucky enough to talk to Dr. Jill Andrew about her work as a Toronto MPP. But first, let's get started with a segment I'm calling This Week in the North. In a time when minutes feel like days, but months feel like seconds, it's easy to forget the important stuff. Like policy decisions, or, if you're like me and have been alone for 11 months, the warm touch of another human being. So, what happened last week? Let's start with Monday. On Monday, Canadian Senator Lynn Bayek, seen here seconds before asking, "Are you sure you belong in this neighborhood?" And who was suspended twice for claiming that the Canadian residential school system wasn't that bad, resigned from the Senate after fellow members openly considered having her permanently expelled. Oh, Lynn, does the thought of being forcibly removed from somewhere you called home for so long terrify you? Also on Monday, members of Parliament, led by Jagmeet Singh, unanimously called on the Canadian government to declare the Proud Boys a terrorist group, which is great. Canada does not need a violent, gun-toting, racist organization. We already have the RCMP. On Tuesday, it was revealed that Ontario was sitting on $6.4 billion of COVID-19 funding, a statement that led many to criticize Doug Ford, who has also come under fire recently for his refusal to fund paid sick leave for essential workers. Ford fired back, saying, "The difference is the NDP and Liberals spend every single penny they have, then come hat in hand looking for extra money, be it raising taxes or going to the federal government. We're being prudent fiscal managers with taxpayers' money." Dude, you sound like an evil factory foreman from a Dickens novel. "No more pennies for you, you lazy liberal orphans. Now put your hats back on and get back to the mines." I have a degree in theater. Ford has spent the entire pandemic hesitating, blaming everyone but himself for the rapid spread of the virus, and creating lockdown rules so confusing they make Christopher Nolan's Tenet look like a nice, straightforward movie about bullets that just sometimes move backwards. And now he's apparently been holding on to billions of dollars like a bleached blonde Ebenezer Scrooge in the hopes that he can balance his budget at the end of March. I'm just gonna reuse that picture, it works. Like Scrooge, everyone hates him. Unlike Scrooge, his story probably won't end with him giving money to the poor. A Superior Court judge ruled on Wednesday that Quebec's pandemic curfew would no longer apply to the homeless, a move that came as a surprise to no one with a soul. The ruling will be in effect until February 5th, which is perfect. Everyone knows that in Quebec, winter ends in February. Premier Legault has been against exempting the homeless from the curfew, but look, I'm sure he had a good reason for it.
And if we change the rule and say you cannot give a ticket to somebody who is saying that he's an homeless, you may have some people that will pretend to be an homeless. So I think that right now it's working well.
Noble words from a noble man. It brings to mind Aragorn's inspiring speech at the end of Return of the King. Okay, so listen guys, we could save Frodo and Sam from certain death right now, but what if we do, and an orc tries to escape Mordor by dressing up as a hobbit? That would be the worst. Let's just hang tight, wait till they've been swallowed up by lava, and then kill all these bad guys. Sound good? I think that right now, what we're doing is working well. On Thursday, Canada's Wonderland announced that it plans to reopen in May if the Ontario government allows it to do so. While this is obviously a decision based on financial struggles and the need to hire performers in advance, everyone who remembers last year's Japanese amusement park request to scream inside your heart can only wonder what pandemic-related changes will happen inside the beloved Canadian theme park. Well, at the very least, I can tell you that here at Late Night in Canada, we've obtained secret information about Wonderland's new slogan. Canada's Wonderland. You'll never look at the bat the same way. The big story on Friday was Trudeau announcing new and severe restrictions on air travel, as well as most Canadian airlines suspending service to the Caribbean and Mexico. I mean, it sounds kind of hasty. It's only been a few weeks. Wait, what was that? Oh, it's been 11 months. They're just doing that now? Oh. All arrivals to Canada will have to quarantine in a hotel for up to 3 days, a stay that could cost them as much as $2,000, proving it again that travel, like bail, fraud, and tax evasion, is only a problem for the poors. Also, why are people still flying? Listen, just because you can doesn't mean you should. And I could send Tom Hiddleston my 50-page Loki fan fiction about our sexy adventures in Asgard, but I don't, because that, like vacationing during a pandemic, would be wrong, and because he asked me not to do it again. No one needs to go to Cuba badly enough to risk their lives and the lives of people around them. If you're that desperate for a getaway, do what I do. Turn up your radiators, chug a bottle of cheap white rum, and queue up a beach playlist on Spotify. It works fine if your standards, like mine, are very low. And on that very personal note, that was This Week in the North. I mean, normally there would be a commercial to break up these segments, but no one's getting paid for this, and I'm doing it all myself. So instead, please enjoy this short video of a panda getting stuck in a tree.
Oh no.
Delightful. Moving on. With the coronavirus still raging across the country, all eyes and hopes are currently set on the vaccine rollout. I'll be looking at that and what it means for Canadians in a segment I'm calling The Focus. If you've been watching the news this past week, you've probably noticed that things concerning the COVID vaccine and its rollout in Canada have been a little up and down. If by up and down you mean a horrifying roller coaster of constantly changing information. Every day it feels like we're getting new updates, and because numbers worldwide are fluctuating daily, it's difficult to predict what will or won't happen, but let's start from the beginning. As of last week, Canada has approved 2 vaccines from 2 different companies, Pfizer and Moderna, and is awaiting approval of a third from a company called AstraZeneca, which sounds less like a pharmaceutical company and more like a rejected Star Trek ship. Both vaccines require 2 doses, both claim an efficacy rate of around 95%, and both are mRNA vaccines. That means instead of injecting a tiny piece of the virus into our bodies like typical vaccines, mRNA ones instead train the body to recognize a little piece of protein found on the surface of the COVID-19 virus, learn how to destroy it, and thus teach us how to protect ourselves against COVID in future. It's like the medical equivalent of punching someone when you see a Volkswagen Beetle. When you see that dumb bug-shaped car coming down the road, you don't think about it, you just punch the person closest to you because somebody years ago punched you and said, that's what you do when you see that car. That metaphor right there is why I was not chosen for the vaccine task force. Now, Trudeau has repeatedly stated that every Canadian who wants a vaccine will be able to get one by September 2021. A claim that is being challenged daily by the opposition due to the numerous setbacks that have surrounded the global rollout so far. It came out on Thursday that Canada was ranked 20th in terms of vaccines administered per capita. Even though we're a leader in advanced vaccine purchases, we're behind places like the UK and the United States, which, okay, makes sense. It's where most of the vaccines are manufactured. We are also, however, behind countries like Romania, Malta, Denmark, and Slovenia. Slovenia? No one even knows where that is. How can we be lagging behind a country that sounds like the name of a Scandinavian skin cream? The answer, of course, is mostly due to the fact that Pfizer's Belgian plant, from where Canada is expected to get 4 million doses of the vaccine by March, shut down temporarily for upgrades last week. This has caused us to receive far fewer vaccines than was originally forecasted, and forced provinces to cancel promised vaccine appointments. Now, Trudeau remains confident that all promised doses will arrive on time, but can't say why other than he has a good relationship with his European partners. Okay, Justin, I've had good relationships with partners too, but that did not stop them from running away because they were afraid of commitment. And it's not just Canada that's feeling the pinch. The Pfizer delay has caused a massive upheaval felt around the world and led to the EU threatening to impose export blockades on the vaccines. This is leading some to fear that countries will resort to something called vaccine nationalism, where larger, richer countries get the vaccine and poorer countries get thoughts and prayers. I don't need to remind anyone what a fucking terrible idea that is. The coronavirus isn't going to stay away from poorer countries because it feels bad for them. It's not a white tourist looking to find themselves in Europe. Unless the majority of the world gets vaccinated, this virus is not going away. And I don't want to propose a battle royale style competition where you give world leaders a few makeshift weapons and tell them that whoever's still alive in 24 hours gets first dibs on the vaccine. But I am saying that Trudeau could absolutely take Angela Merkel in a knife fight. So after it was announced that Canada's vaccine delivery would be delayed due to Pfizer's Belgian plant undergoing renovations, Canadian politicians rushed to blame anyone and everyone. Conservative leader Erin O'Toole, seen here wondering, do all dogs go to heaven? Criticized Trudeau's rollout plan, saying, we want to see our government succeed, but this Prime Minister has abandoned us. Which, frankly, is a little dramatic. It's not like Trudeau is off on vacation to some tropical island in the middle of the pandemic. I mean, who is he, a Conservative MP at Christmas? O'Toole says that Trudeau should have focused on domestic vaccine production. However, Back when countries were starting to make deals for vaccines, Canada lacked the facilities to make the number of them necessary to hold our own, partly because many of them were shut down under previous Conservative governments. Canada is developing our own vaccines. A company called Providence Therapeutics is currently in stage 1 of its clinical trials and is slated to have a vaccine by early 2022. We're like the guy who shows up after the party is over because his car broke down on the side of the road and he had to walk all the way there. He brought beer, but by that point, everyone's already got some from someone else and is either crying or passed out in the bushes. Doug Ford helpfully weighed in on how he wanted to contribute in the only way old Dougie knows how.
If I was in his shoes, I'm sure he is doing it, but I'd be on that phone call every single day. I'd be up that guy's yin-yang so far with a firecracker he wouldn't know what hit him from Pfizer.
That man speaks for us. In addition to helpful policy recommendations like sodomy rockets, Ford and O'Toole have also called on Trudeau to ask the states for help with the Canadian vaccine supply. Cool. Just one little issue. Have you seen the states right now? The former Cheeto-in-chief left the current administration no vaccine plan whatsoever. Health officials have gone on record saying that they don't even know how many vaccines they actually have, and it's been reported that millions of doses are just missing because of Trump's gross incompetence. Asking the United States for help with vaccine rollouts is like asking for a fire extinguisher from the guy who just set his own house on fire and thinks Burning Man sounds like a great supervillain name. On Wednesday, Pfizer asked Health Canada to extend the number of doses it gets from each vial of vaccine from 5 to 6 in order to make good on its Canadian contract. And let's be clear here, you know you might be in trouble when a major pharmaceutical company tells you you're gonna need to start rationing. No one watched that part in The Martian when Matt Damon has to go down to 1 potato a day and thought, this means everything's going really well for him. Pfizer says it's possible to get a 6th dose out of the vial by using what's called low dead space syringes, which, aside from sharing its name with a video game where you're attacked by mutated space monsters, thereby doing nothing to assuage my needle phobia, is a problem, because only a quarter of the syringes Canada has ordered are that necessary type. So, after all this, where do we stand? Well, as of Friday, Health Canada has promised to decide on AstraZeneca in the next few days. A UK-based Economist intelligence unit says non-vulnerable Canadians might have to wait 6 months longer than Americans or Europeans for the vaccine, and we are still waiting to see how the vaccines will handle the numerous COVID-19 variants from places like Brazil, the UK, and South Africa. Things are very up in the air right now, which is not what we want to hear. However, much like the fact that Tom Hiddleston will never read Loki's bootylicious Asgardian adventures, it's just what we have to accept. And if all of this is stressing you out, here's another video of a panda falling out of a tree. This has been The Focus. My guest tonight is Dr. Jill Andrew, the Ontario NDP culture critic, women's issues critic for the official opposition, and my MPP. She is an all-around incredible member of the Toronto community, and we sat down last week to chat about politics, community engagement during COVID, and her support for the arts. Take a look. Dr. Andrew, thank you so much for being here with me today and for being officially the first guest in the first episode of Late Night in Canada.
Yeah.
Yay!
Thanks for having me, Claire. Thank you very, very much for having me.
Pleasure. It's an honor. So before we get started, I just want to get a few things straight here. So you're an MPP. You're the first Black and queer person to be elected to the Ontario legislature. You're the Ontario NDP culture critic and women's issues critic for the official opposition. You're a member of the Ontario NDP Black Caucus, the co-founder of Body Confidence Awareness, a huge supporter of comedy in the arts, and oh yeah, you also have a PhD. So, well, my first question to you has to be, is there anything you can't do?
Well, you know what I can't do? I can't fly. And I'll tell you why flying is important. I wish I could fly. I wish I could fly like a bird, not fly to St. Bart's. No, no, no. I mean fly like a bird, because quite frankly, when we get on to some of the buses and the trains these days, they are quite full. You know, maybe not as full as they would be, you know, in regular times, but still pretty full considering that we're supposed to be socially distanced and masked, of course, you know, in our best way to fight back against COVID-19. So, you know, I really do sometimes wish I could fly,
Fair.
you know,
I mean,
from
like,
one
we
spot
shouldn't
to
be
the next
flying.
so we could be safe.
Yeah, exactly.
Fly like a bird, that is.
We shouldn't be flying to St. Bart's anyway.
No, we should
pandemic.
not be flying to St. Bart's. You should tell someone that, actually. Let's
Oh,
tell somebody that.
Who might that be, Jill?
Ah. But no, on a very serious note, you know, a lot of our essential workers, as you know, don't have the luxury of staying home. And, you know, what they need is to have the safest public transit possible. And for us, that means buses and trains and streetcars that aren't packed, because it really is, you know, putting people's lives at stake when they can't travel to work safely. And since we are in a province where the premier is not saying yes to paid sick days, you know, we've got to do what's best for our community members. And having safe transportation during a pandemic seems like a pretty no-brainer to me.
It does.
Yeah.
Well, my actual first question, besides what can't you do, with that wonderful answer is, so you got past the Eating Disorders Awareness Week, which received royal assent in December of 2020, which I'm pretty sure is the only good thing to come out of last year. Congratulations. I would love for you to tell me about kind of your plans for its implementation.
Right on. Well, thank you so much, Claire. You know, yes, Bill 61, Eating Disorders Awareness Week, the first week of February, annually will now be Eating Disorders Awareness Week in Ontario. And it was a great historic moment. It certainly wasn't just my moment. You know, I became an MPP 2.5 years ago, but there have been so many community leaders, you know, folks at NEDIC, at Need, at Body Brave, at Spadina, at Sheeta's place on Spadina. So many folks and individuals, you know, who shared their story, you know, of either having an eating disorder or knowing someone they love, or even losing someone to an eating disorder or eating problem. So it was really a great moment to see, you know, politicians, regardless of their party stripes, recognize that we needed to have this week. And I get it. It's a first start. You know, it's a week. It's a week of awareness.
Yep.
It's a week to raise awareness, to raise people's education around eating disorders, and for us to have conversations around what kind of supports and resources our government needs to invest in community, so folks with eating disorders can get the proper treatment, the right interventions, diverse treatment options. You know, we also need to look at prevention, and a really big part that's missing here is a focus on data and research, because, you know, the numbers on eating disorders, you know, aren't as concrete as we would like them to be, because frankly, there isn't enough funding to help make research, you know, and data available, you know. So here in Canada, we know we have about 1 million folks who are struggling with eating disorders. About half of those are right here in Ontario. So this is a significant population. So the bill, you know, will hopefully raise awareness on all of that and really push our government to recognize, you know, eating disorders not only as one of the most, you know, most fatal of mental health challenges, but also something that one can work through and one can beat if they have access to the right treatment, to the right intervention, to a team of healthcare professionals, a holistic team, you know, one that can relate to their lived experience. And all of that is really important. And I mean, you know, something else that Bill 61, you know, has done, and it really opened the conversation on, is the fact that eating disorders, you know, they don't discriminate. They don't discriminate. You know, a lot of times we think of EDs as, you know, a white woman's issue, a middle and upper class issue, but really eating disorders can also impact, you know, Black and Indigenous and racialized communities. They can impact fat people. They can impact disabled people, 2S LGBTQIA+ people, especially trans people who are also addressing issues of transphobia, you know, especially in healthcare. So there are so many areas that I hope to see Bill 61 begin to open a conversation. And in fact, next week
Hey.
is Eating Disorder Awareness Week. And on Monday, myself and some stakeholders, we're getting together, and we have a special guest, the Associate Minister of Mental Health and Addictions, the Honorable Michael Tibilow, will actually be joining us at a roundtable to hear predominantly from community organizations, the people who are on the front lines, the psychiatrists, the psychologists, the social workers, the educators, the nutritionists, the dietitians, and really the people who are living this experience themselves. And of course, the family members and loved ones who are their essential, caregivers in some cases. So this will be an opportunity. It'll be short, and I hope that it's the first of many opportunities that I'll get to work with the government to ensure that EDAW doesn't just remain a week of significance and an important one that really helps validate people's experience, but that, as you said, Claire, we move to that place of implementation and figuring out, what are the dollars and cents we need behind this? What are the human resources we need behind this to ensure that folks across our province, from right here in St. Paul's all the way across, can get the help that they need.
That's awesome. Well, congratulations on that.
Thank you.
That's
Thank you.
awesome. So talking about St. Paul's and the community, I know so many people who know you for participating in the community. You're known as a giant badass, in their words, to like everybody that I've talked to. Yes. And so with last year and right now, with the pandemic affecting how we as a community can kind of come together, what were some of your biggest challenges or some of your biggest victories, or both, in the last year with connecting? And
Yes. Well, let me start with the challenges, and then we can end on a great note, because there's something we did in the summer that was really quite cool. When COVID first hit, and we were dealing with folks who were scared, didn't have answers, all of a sudden, life as we knew it seems to have just stood still. This was an unprecedented pandemic. The challenges were simply communicating the message, to our community, people who weren't quite getting what they needed from the government in terms of updates that spoke to their circumstances, whether that was around rent, if, what happens if you don't have rent, what happens if you don't have the ability to pay for the roof over your head because you've lost your job, and CERB hadn't happened yet. And there was all of this uncertainty, and there was all of this fear, and that was quite challenging to watch.
Yeah, everything happened really fast.
Exactly. Our community here, we're resilient, we're bold, we're resourceful, but it just seemed as though everything, stopped, and we weren't sure what we were dealing with, and even now in this, in this second, second wave of COVID-19, we're still seeing so many constituents who are worried about housing issues. We're seeing so much sadness around small businesses, small businesses that are the heart of the community, that have had to shift the way they do business. And obviously they want to be healthy, they want to be safe, they want their customers to be healthy and safe, but they've had to do this, while looking at big box stores, that have been able to sell food. I get that. That's totally okay. But also a 55-inch TV, like, that's not an essential item right now. You know what I mean?
Stores that sell food.
There you go.
There's some chips. It's
Right. So, what I want to see, our premier, quite frankly, Doug Ford, get off of the billions of dollars that we know.
6.4, wasn't it?
Well, it's actually way more than that.
Oh.
The last count was more around 12 billion, but it's billions of dollars, quite frankly, that's here for COVID recovery, that really should be going into the hands of our residents, going into the hands of some of the most marginalized folks in our community. I'm thinking of, disabled community members, folks who are on ODSP and OW, who were dealing with a crisis of poverty, quite frankly, long before COVID, and now it's only been exacerbated. I'm thinking about, again, those essential workers who are demanding paid sick days. Like, it's such a basic thing, and then to learn that, the premier is spending the least amount when you look at some other provinces. They're spending the least amount here in Ontario to help us get through. And I'm really wondering why, because we need our essential workers, we need our education workers, we need our schools to be safe, we need our bus drivers and our transit operators to be safe. We need our communities to be able to feel that they can trust the government, and so these are some of the challenges, obviously, that we're dealing with, in terms of folks not knowing or not being able to discern the right information, folks also feeling socially isolated. We've had a lot of conversations around mental health. We had a great mental health Zoom event with one of our local constituents who is a co-founder of this wonderful, wonderful initiative called Being Here Human, and Being Here Human. And their thing is, how do we process grief? Well, let's talk about grief literacy, and let's talk about loss, and let's make it more of a normalized feeling, so that we don't have all that that stigma and shame and self-deprecation around grief. So we've had really significant talks about mental health, because a lot of people are socially isolated. A lot of folks, are going through this alone, quite frankly. We've seen what's happened in our long-term care homes with our seniors and with elders and with other loved ones in congregate settings. So that's all been a great big challenge. We know that there are a lot of teachers right here in our community, and parents that are struggling, and students that are struggling with the new virtual way of doing education, quote unquote, and really, schools need to be safe spaces. And if we're going to open our schools, we need to have smaller classrooms. We need to have some of that billions of dollars, funneled into making sure that ventilation is happening for our kids, so that they can stay safe, and all of the workers and education workers and teachers and everybody else. So there's a whole lot of challenge, here in St. Paul's, and of course across Ontario, but there's also been this great opportunity, that's allowed us to not necessarily slow down, because some of us are going from Zoom to Zoom to Zoom meeting, and phone call to phone call to phone call. Well, a lot of us are, believe it or not, a lot of us are. You don't have to be a politician to be busy during a pandemic. I know a lot of people who are juggling so much, and I can't say hats off enough to PSWs and teachers and education workers and essential workers, quite frankly, who have been, keeping our communities alive, But what I've also seen during this pandemic, we check in on each other more. As busy as we are, as depressive, as saddening and angering as this pandemic has been, I feel as though we're checking in on one another more, because we know just how difficult it can be on our physical bodies, but also on our mental spirit, as well too. I also have seen, this boundless generosity from artists. Whether we're talking literary artists, whether we're talking visual artists, whether we're talking comedians, actors, this, that, and the other, musicians, dancers. People have shared, sorry, I just had a little choke moment there. People have shared their art online.
I think
and I have called that social medicine, because that's keeping my mental health up, and I know it's keeping a lot of folks' mental health up.
It is, and I would agree with that. And I think a lot of that comes from, I think, artists got really angry at the beginning of this because A, we don't receive a lot of funding as it is, and B, we're not classified as like essential workers. But I think once you get called You get told that you're just leeching off the government and getting served and all that kind of stuff. And all of the artists that I know are creating all the time. They're putting out so much amazing content because we just want to work. We want to do our jobs.
Yes.
And so we're doing them, and we're giving people art in the only way that we can right now, which
Yes.
would be nice to do all the time if we had the funding to do so. And I know that you have,
couldn't be more right.
You've gone after the Legislative Assembly of Ontario for comedy and recognizing comedy as an art form for grants. So I mean, on behalf of the comedy community, thank you so much for that.
Oh, well, can I also give a thank you to the comedy community? I want to say this woman, Sandra Battiglini, who at one point was the president. I know she I think she co-founded the Canadian Association of Stand-Up Comedians. This is important work. So, I just want to give her a shout out and give all the comedians a shout out who have been fighting for this for quite a long time and well before COVID-19. Because again, we have to recognize, that artists, your work is not a hobby. It might be a hobby. It might be something you love, but it's your career. It's your passion. It's your job, and it shouldn't be quote unquote free. It shouldn't be something that's, it's just a fluffy art form or a fluffy comedy hobby. This is not the case whatsoever. Comedy is an art form. Comedians are entrepreneurs. They are small business owners.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? They're folks that are contributing to their community. That is job creation. That is linked to tourism. That is a night out on the town, right? When you get to see a show, you have dinner, you stay at a hotel, maybe, whatever the case might be. That is a real significant part of our economy. And when we see things like COVID happen, and it's destabilized everything, we get it.
Yes.
But we have to recognize that artists were already at the lower end, for the most part, of the economic bracket, So of course they're going to be hit the hardest, even though, we contribute so much to the economy, billions of dollars to the economy, right?
Yeah. Well, Jill, I can't thank you enough for coming on the show today. I'm so excited to have you as my first guest. For everybody who's interested, you can follow Dr. Andrew on Twitter and Instagram at Jill's Last Word. And again, just thank you for taking the time to speak to me.
Thank you so much. I thank you. We all thank you. And my cats, Josephine Baker and Dorothy Dandridge, thank you too.
Cats have the best names.
Well, of course, they have to have the greatest names. They have to have, resilient, resounding, Black, beautiful, powerful activist, culture and artists names.
Yes. I would expect nothing less.
You have a great day, Claire. Thanks so much for having me on.
Thank you. Take care.
Stay safe.
Bye.
Okay. Bye-bye.
In the weeks to come, you're going to meet a huge array of incredible Canadians. Actors, rappers, nurses, food bank administrators, and so many more. I'm real excited. So until then, that's my show. Thank you so much for watching Late Night in Canada, and I'll see you next week.